The alarm clock buzzed at 4 in the morning, but Kenya Williams was already awake. She had been staring at the ceiling for the past hour, her mind racing with thoughts about the day ahead. Today was the day that could change everything for her and her 2 children. Kenya quietly slipped out of bed and walked to the small kitchen of their 1-bedroom apartment. The place wasn't much, but it was home. After her divorce 6 months ago, this tiny space was all she could afford on her nurse's salary. She put the coffee maker on and looked out the window at the dark Atlanta streets below. "Mom, are you making pancakes?" Her 12-year-old son Damon appeared in the doorway, his hair sticking up in all directions. Even at this early hour, he was thinking about food. Kenya smiled for the first time in days. "We don't have time for pancakes today, baby, remember? We have that big flight to catch." She ruffled his hair as he groaned dramatically. "But I packed those granola bars like for the plane. The ones with chocolate chips." 8-year-old Lily bounded into the kitchen, already dressed and ready to go. Unlike her brother, she had been excited about this trip for weeks. She had never been on an airplane before, and to her, this was the adventure of a lifetime. "Yes, the ones with chocolate chips," Kenya laughed. Her daughter's excitement was infectious, even though Kenya's stomach was twisted in knots about what lay ahead. The job interview in Los Angeles was her last real shot. After the divorce, money had been tighter than ever. Her ex-husband had moved across the country and barely sent any support. Kenya had been working double shifts at the hospital, but it still wasn't enough. The bills kept piling up and she was behind on rent. Again. When the recruiter from Pacific Medical Center had called about a position in their emergency department, Kenya had almost said no. The flight would cost money she didn't have, and taking the kids out of school wasn't ideal, but the salary they were offering was almost double what she made in Atlanta. It could be the fresh start her family desperately needed. Kenya had cashed in every favor and scraped together just enough money for 3 economy tickets. They would have to share 1 hotel room for 2 nights, and she had packed sandwiches for most of their meals. But if she got this job, it would all be worth it. "Mom, what if the plane crashes?" Damon asked suddenly, his usual bravado replaced by genuine worry. "Planes are actually the safest way to travel," Kenya said, giving him a reassuring hug. "You're more likely to get hurt riding your bike than flying in an airplane. But what if—" "No what ifs today," she interrupted gently. "Today we're being brave. All of us." The ride to the airport was quiet except for Lily's constant questions about flying. Damon stared out the window of their elderly neighbor's car, who had offered to drive them since Kenya couldn't afford airport parking. Kenya reviewed her interview notes one more time, even though she had memorized every word. At the airport, the kids pressed their faces against the huge windows, watching planes take off and land. Kenya checked their boarding passes for the 10th time and made sure their IDs were ready. Everything had to go perfectly today. "Flight 447 to Los Angeles now boarding," the gate agent announced. Kenya's heart jumped. As they walked down the jet bridge, Lily grabbed her mother's hand tightly. "I'm a little scared now," she whispered. "Me too," Kenya admitted. "But we're doing this together, okay?" They found their seats in the back of the plane. The economy section was cramped and their seats didn't even recline. But the kids didn't mind. Damon immediately started reading the safety card, while Lily explored every button and compartment she could reach. Kenya noticed the well-dressed, older man in first class as they walked past. He looked to be in his 70s with silver hair and an expensive suit. Even from a distance, she could tell he wasn't feeling well. He was pale and kept coughing into a handkerchief. As a nurse, Kenya automatically noticed these things about people. "Welcome aboard Flight 447, the flight attendant announced over the intercom. "We'll be flying at an altitude of 35,000 feet today with clear skies all the way to Los Angeles." As the plane taxied to the runway, Kenya closed her eyes and said a small prayer, not just for a safe flight, but for this opportunity to work out. Her kids deserved better than their current situation. They deserved a mom who wasn't constantly stressed about money, who could take them places and buy them things without calculating every penny. The plane lifted off, and Lily squealed with delight as Atlanta grew smaller below them. Damon tried to act cool, but Kenya could see the amazement in his eyes as they climbed through the clouds. "Look, Mom," Lily pointed out the window. "We're above the clouds. It's like we're in heaven." Kenya smiled and squeezed her daughter's hand. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe they were heading toward something better. The first few hours of the flight passed peacefully. Kenya reviewed her interview materials while the kids colored in the activity, books she had bought at the dollar store. Damon was working on a crossword puzzle, determined to finish it before they landed. Lily was drawing pictures of their airplane adventure to show her teacher when they got back. The flight attendants were busy serving drinks and snacks to the packed plane. Kenya had splurged on orange juice for the kids, even though water was free. Some things were worth the extra few dollars to see their faces light up. Around the 3-hour mark, Kenya noticed the older gentleman from first class getting up to use the restroom. He moved slowly and seemed unsteady on his feet. Kenya's nurse instincts kicked in, and she found herself watching him carefully as he made his way down the aisle. "Mom, can we get another juice?" Lily asked, tugging on Kenya's sleeve. "In a little." "Well, sweetheart," Kenya replied, still keeping an eye on the elderly passenger. Something about his color and the way he was breathing didn't look right to her. Damon had finished his crossword and was now reading the in-flight magazine. "Mom, did you know they serve 5 million meals a year on airplanes?" "That's a lot of meals," Kenya agreed absently. The older man was on his way back to his seat now, but he looked even worse than before. "What happens if someone gets sick on a plane?" Lily asked innocently, as if she could sense her mother's concern. "Well, if someone gets really sick, the pilot can land the plane early at the nearest airport," Kenya explained. "And there are usually doctors or nurses on board who can help." She had no idea that in just a few minutes, she would be putting that knowledge to use in a way that would change all their lives forever. The sound was unmistakable. Kenya had heard it too many times in her years as a nurse, the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor, followed by gasps and screams from other passengers. Kenya's head snapped up from her interview notes. About 20 rows ahead, she could see people jumping out of their seats and backing away from the aisle. Someone was down. "Stay here," she told Damon and Lily firmly, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Do not move from these seats." "Mom, what's happening?" Lily's voice was small and scared. "Someone needs help, baby. I'll be right back." Kenya was already moving, pushing past other passengers who seemed frozen in shock. When she reached the scene, her worst fears were confirmed. The elderly gentleman from first class was lying on the floor, his face gray and his breathing shallow and rapid. His expensive suit was wrinkled now, and there was panic in his eyes as he struggled to get air into his lungs. 2 flight attendants were kneeling beside him, but Kenya could see they were overwhelmed. One was trying to talk to him while the other was frantically searching through a small medical kit. "I'm a registered nurse," Kenya announced, dropping to her knees beside the man. "What's his name?" "James Wellington," one of the flight attendants said gratefully. "He just collapsed coming back from the restroom." Kenya immediately began checking his vital signs. His pulse was rapid and irregular, his skin was clammy, and his lips had a slight blue tinge. Classic signs of cardiac distress. "Mr. Wellington, can you hear me?" she asked, taking his hand. His eyes focused on her face. "I'm Kenya, and I'm a nurse. You're going to be okay, but I need you to try to stay calm." Behind her, she could hear other passengers murmuring and some crying. A few people were taking pictures with their phones, which made her angry, but she pushed that aside. Right now, this man's life was what mattered. "Mom." Damon's voice cut through the noise. Kenya turned to see her son standing at the edge of the crowd, medical kit in hand. "I told you to stay in your seat," she said, but she was proud of his quick thinking. "I asked the flight attendant for the big medical kit," he said, setting it down beside her. "And Lily is staying put, like you said." Kenya opened the kit and was relieved to find it well stocked. There was oxygen, an automated external defibrillator, and various medications. "Good thinking, baby. Now I need you to help me, okay?" James Wellington grabbed Kenya's arm weakly. "Can't breathe," he gasped. "I know it's scary, but we're going to help you." Kenya's voice was calm and professional. even though her heart was racing. She had dealt with cardiac emergencies before, but never at 35,000 feet with limited resources. She quickly got the oxygen mask over his face and checked his blood pressure using the kit's equipment. The numbers weren't good. His heart was definitely in distress, and she suspected he might be having a mild heart attack. "I need to get him to first class where there's more room," she told the flight attendant. The interview tomorrow. She knew she had done the right thing today. The hotel room was small but clean, with 2 double beds and a view of the parking lot. It was nearly 2 in the morning by the time they got settled. Damon and Lily crashed. Immediately, exhausted from their long day, Kenya lay in the dark, listening to her children's steady breathing. In 6 hours, she would wake up and prepare for the interview that could change their lives. But as she drifted off to sleep, her last thought wasn't about the job. It was about a lonely man in a Denver hospital who had reminded her that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply show up for another human being. She had no idea that James Wellington was lying awake in his hospital bed at that very moment, making phone calls and setting plans in motion that would repay her kindness in ways she could never imagine. The next morning would bring the interview, but it would also bring news that would change everything. Sometimes the most significant moments in life come disguised as ordinary acts of compassion, and Kenya Williams was about to discover just how true that really was. The alarm clock she had set seemed to go off immediately after she closed her eyes, but Kenya got up, said a prayer for strength, and prepared to face whatever the new day would bring. After yesterday, she felt like she could handle anything. Kenya's phone was ringing. Through the fog of exhaustion, she reached for it, squinting at the bright screen. 7:15 in the morning. Her interview wasn't until 9, but she had planned to wake up early anyway. "Hello?" Her voice was rough with sleep. "Ms. Williams? This is Rebecca Martinez from Pacific Medical Center. I'm calling about your interview this morning." Kenya's stomach dropped. This couldn't be good news. "Yes, I'm afraid we're going to need to reschedule. Dr. Patterson, who was supposed to conduct your interview, had a family emergency and had to fly out of town unexpectedly." Kenya sat up in bed, her heart sinking. "When would you like to reschedule? 4? There was a pause. "Well, that's the thing. The position needs to be filled immediately, and we have another candidate who can interview today. I'm very sorry, but we're going to have to move forward with them." Kenya felt the world tilting around her. "I see. Again, I'm very sorry. We were impressed with your qualifications, and we wish you the best in your job search." After hanging up, Kenya sat in the dark hotel room trying to process what had just happened. All of it. The emergency landing, the delayed flights, the exhaustion, the money spent on this trip. All for nothing. Damon stirred in the next bed. "Mom, is everything okay?" Kenya wiped her eyes quickly. "The interview got canceled, baby." "What does that mean?" "It means we came all this way for nothing." The words came out more bitter than she intended. Lily woke up and climbed into bed with her mother. "I'm sorry, Mommy." "It's not your fault, sweetheart. Sometimes things just don't work out the way we hope." Kenya looked at her children and felt a wave of guilt. Here she was, feeling sorry for herself, when yesterday they had literally helped save someone's life. Her priorities needed adjustment. "You know what?" she said, forcing a smile. "We're in Los Angeles. We've never been here before. Let's go see the ocean." "Really?" Lily's eyes lit up. "Really? We can't change the interview, but we can still make this trip worth something." They spent the morning at Santa Monica Pier. The kids had never seen the Pacific Ocean before, and their joy was infectious. Damon tried to act too cool to be excited, but Kenya caught him grinning as the waves crashed over his feet. Lily collected shells and squealed every time the cold water touched her toes. For a few hours, Kenya almost forgot about their financial problems. Almost forgot about the missed opportunity. Her children were happy, and that had to count for something. Around noon, Kenya's phone rang again. Denver area code. "Ms. Williams, this is James Wellington." "Mr. Wellington, how are you feeling?" "Much better, thanks to you." His voice was stronger than it had been on the plane. "I hope you don't mind me calling directly. Dr. Chen gave me your number. Of course not. I'm so glad you're okay. I understand you had a job interview this morning. How did it go? Kenya hesitated. She didn't want to burden him with her problems, especially when he was recovering from a heart episode. It actually got canceled at the last minute. I'm sorry to hear that. Listen, Ms. Williams, I know this might sound strange, but would it be possible for us to meet for coffee? I'm being discharged from the hospital this afternoon, and I'd like to talk to you about something. Oh, you don't need to do that. You should be resting. Please. It's important. And I'd love to see those wonderful children of yours again. Something in his voice made Kenya agree. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the hospital at 3 o'clock. Who was that? Damon asked as Kenya hung up. Mr. James. He wants to meet us for coffee. Is he all better? Lily asked hopefully. He sounds much better. What Kenya didn't know was that James Wellington had spent the morning making phone calls from his hospital bed. The first call had been to his assistant, explaining why he wouldn't be at the board meeting he was supposed to chair. The second call had been to his lawyer. The third call had been to a private investigator, asking for a complete background check on Kenya Williams and her family. By the time Kenya and her children walked into the coffee shop that afternoon, James had learned everything about their situation. The recent divorce, the financial struggles, Kenya's exemplary record as a nurse, the eviction notice she thought she had hidden from her children. James was sitting at a corner table when they arrived. He looked much better than he had on the plane. His color was back to normal, and he was wearing casual clothes instead of the expensive suit. But there was something different about his eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "My angels," he said, standing to hug each of them. "How are you feeling?" "We're good." "How are you feeling?" Lily asked, studying his face carefully. "Like a new man, thanks to your family." They ordered drinks and settled into conversation. James asked about their trip, about the canceled interview, about their lives back in Atlanta. He listened intently to everything they said, asking thoughtful questions and laughing at Damon's jokes. "Mr. James," Lily said suddenly, "why don't you have any family?" "Lily," Kenya scolded gently, "that's a personal question." "No, it's all right," James said. "I never married, never had children. I spent my whole life building a business, thinking that success was the most important thing. Yesterday, when I thought I might die, I realized I had never really lived." "What kind of business?" Damon asked. James smiled. "Healthcare. I own hospitals and medical centers." Kenya raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a coincidence." "Actually, Ms. Williams, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." James's expression grew serious. "What I'm about to tell you might surprise you." He pulled out his phone and showed them a website, Wellington Medical Group, one of the largest private healthcare networks in the country with facilities in 12 states. "I founded this company 40 years ago," James said quietly. "I'm the chairman of the board." Kenya stared at the phone screen, then at James. "You're that James Wellington?" "Yesterday I was just a sick old man who might have died alone on an airplane. Today I'm a man who has been given a second chance at life by 3 people who asked for nothing in return." Lily looked confused. "Does that mean you're really rich?" James laughed. "Yes, sweetheart. It means I'm really rich." "Then why were you flying by yourself? Rich people have lots of friends." James's expression grew sad. "Because I spent so many years caring more about money than about people. But yesterday your family showed me what really matters." Kenya felt overwhelmed. "Mr. Wellington, I don't understand why you're telling us this." "Because I want to offer you a job, Ms. Williams. Not just any job. I want to offer you the position of Director of Emergency Nursing at our flagship hospital in Atlanta." Kenya's mouth fell open. What?" "The salary is $200,000 a year, plus full benefits and education funds for both children. Any college they want to attend completely paid for." The coffee shop seemed to spin around Kenya. She gripped the edge of the table. "Mr. Wellington, that's incredibly generous, but I can't accept charity." "This isn't charity," James said firmly. Yesterday I watched you work under pressure with limited resources. I saw your medical knowledge, your leadership skills, your compassion. Any hospital would be lucky to have you. But why us? You don't even know us. James reached across the table and took Kenya's hand. Because in my 62 years of business, I've never seen anyone demonstrate the kind of character your family showed yesterday. Damon, the way you followed instructions and helped your mother without being asked. Lily, the way you comforted a stranger who was scared. And Kenya, the way you put someone else's life before your own concerns. Tears were rolling down Kenya's cheeks. This doesn't seem real. It's real, James said softly. And there's one more thing. I know this might sound presumptuous, but I was wondering if you'd allow me to be part of your family, not as a boss, but as someone who cares about you. Maybe as an honorary grandfather to these amazing children. Lily clapped her hands together. Really? Can we call you Grandpa James? I would be honored, James said, his own eyes misty. Kenya looked at her children, then at this man who had entered their lives so unexpectedly. 24 hours ago they had been strangers. Now he was offering them not just financial security, but something even more precious. Family. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. As James hugged them all, Kenya realized that sometimes the most important flight you can take is the one that leads you to exactly where you're supposed to be. 6 months later, Kenya stood in the parking lot of Riverside Middle School, watching through the window as Damon walked across the stage to receive his honor roll certificate. Her heart swelled with pride, not just because of his academic achievement, but because of the confident young man he was becoming. Mom, hurry up, the ceremony is starting, Lily called from the school entrance, wearing the new dress James had bought her for the occasion. Coming, baby. Kenya grabbed her purse and James's arm. At 73, he moved a little slower than before his heart episode, but his spirit was stronger than ever. You know, I've attended hundreds of business meetings and board presentations, James said as they walked toward the auditorium. But I've never been more excited about anything than watching that boy graduate. Kenya smiled, still amazed at how naturally James had slipped into their lives. He insisted he was the one receiving the gift, but Kenya knew better. Her children had gained so much more than financial security. They had gained a grandfather who attended every school event, helped with homework, and told stories about building his business empire. The auditorium was packed with families celebrating their 8th graders. Kenya found herself looking around at the other parents, many of whom she now knew from school events. It felt surreal to remember that just 6 months ago, she had been scraping together money for basic necessities. There he is, Lily whispered excitedly as Damon's name was called. James leaned forward in his seat, his phone ready to capture every moment. He had become quite the photographer since joining their family, documenting everything from lost teeth to soccer games. After the ceremony, they gathered outside for pictures. Damon pretended to be embarrassed by all the attention, but Kenya could see how much he enjoyed having his grandfather there. I'm proud of you, son, James told Damon, using the title that had naturally evolved over the months. Thanks, Grandpa James. Are we still going to that fancy restaurant you mentioned? Absolutely. This calls for a celebration. As they drove to dinner in James's car, Kenya reflected on how much had changed. Her new position at Wellington Medical Center had been everything James had promised and more. She was respected by her colleagues, well compensated for her work, and finally able to provide the life she had always dreamed of for her children. But the money, while wonderful, wasn't the most important change. The most important change was sitting in the driver's seat, singing along badly to the radio while Lily giggled at his off-key voice. Grandpa James, you sound like a sick walrus, Lily announced, which only made him sing louder. I'll have you know I was in my church choir for 30 years, James protested. What happened? Did they kick you out? Damon asked with a grin. Very funny, young man. Just for that, you're not getting dessert. Yes, I am. You always say I'm not getting dessert, and then you order me the biggest piece of cake on the menu. James laughed because it was true. He had been making up for lost time, not just with Kenya's children, but with the childhood he felt he had missed by being so focused on business. At the restaurant, James had reserved a private dining room. As they settled in to eat, he raised his glass of sparkling cider. "I want to make a toast," he said, his voice serious now. "6 months ago I thought my life was over, not just because of my heart, but because I realized I had spent 72 years building an empire with no one to share it with." Kenya felt her eyes getting misty. Even after all this time, she still couldn't quite believe how their lives had intersected. "Then 3 angels showed up on Flight 447, James continued. "They didn't just save my life. They gave me a family. They taught me what really matters. So here's to my daughter Kenya, who shows me every day what strength and compassion look like. To my grandson Damon, who reminds me to work hard and dream big. And to my granddaughter Lily, who shows me that joy can be found in the smallest moments." "To family," Kenya said, raising her glass. "To family," Damon and Lily echoed. As they clinked glasses, Kenya thought about the conversation she'd had with James the week before. He had been updating his will and wanted to discuss the children's future. The education funds he had established would not only cover college, but graduate school if they chose. He had also set up trust funds that would ensure they would never face the kind of financial stress Kenya had experienced. "I never had children of my own," he had told her. "Everything I've built, I want to leave to them. But more than that, I want to leave them with the values you've taught them. Kindness, compassion, the willingness to help others even when it's inconvenient." Now watching him cut Lily's steak into perfect bite-sized pieces while explaining to Damon why compound interest was so important, Kenya marveled at how perfectly he fit into their family. After dinner, they drove to James's house. It was a beautiful estate that had felt cold and empty when Kenya first visited, but it was different now. Lily's artwork covered the refrigerator. Damon's basketball trophies sat on the mantel. Family photos filled the frames that had once held business awards. "We watch a movie?" Lily asked, already heading toward the comfortable family room James had created just for these moments. "What do you want to watch?" James asked, settling into his favorite chair while Lily curled up on the couch beside him. "Something with a happy ending," she said. "Don't they all have happy endings?" Damon asked, joining them. "The best ones do," Kenya said, sitting down and pulling her son close. As the opening credits rolled, Kenya's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her sister back in Atlanta. "How's life in paradise?" Kenya looked around the room. James was explaining the movie's plot to Lily even though it had just started. Damon was sneaking popcorn from the bowl when he thought no one was looking. In a few hours, they would go back to their own house, which James had helped them buy in the same neighborhood. But for now, they were exactly where they belonged. She typed back, "Better than I ever imagined." Later that night, after tucking the children into their own beds, Kenya sat on her front porch with a cup of tea. James had gone home, but not before making sure everyone had everything they needed for the next day and confirming plans for the weekend. Her phone rang. It was, "James, did you forget something?" she asked with a smile. "No, I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For today. For every day. For showing an old man that it's never too late to have a family." "James, you don't need to thank us. We're the ones who should be thanking you." "No," he said firmly. "What happened on that airplane wasn't just about medical care. It was about 3 people who saw someone in need and didn't hesitate to help. That says everything about who you are." After they hung up, Kenya sat in the quiet evening air, thinking about the phrase she had heard once. Kindness is never wasted. She had acted on instinct that day on the plane, doing what her training and her heart told her was right. She never could have imagined where that single act of compassion would lead. Her children were secure now, with opportunities she could never have provided on her own. But more than that, they had gained something money couldn't buy. They had gained a grandfather who loved them unconditionally, who celebrated their successes and supported them through their challenges. And James, who had spent decades building wealth but feeling empty, had found the one thing his money could never purchase. He had found a family who loved him not for what he could provide, but for who he was becoming in their presence. Sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with the simplest acts of human kindness. Sometimes 3 strangers on an airplane can become a family bound not by blood but by love, compassion, and the shared understanding that we are all responsible for taking care of each other. As Kenya finally went inside and turned off the lights, she whispered a prayer of gratitude, not just for their changed circumstances, but for the reminder that when we open our hearts to help others, we often find that our own lives are the ones that end up being transformed. The next morning, she would wake up and go to work at a job she loved in a hospital bearing the name of the man who had become her father figure. Damon would attend his new school with confidence, knowing his future was secure. Lily would continue collecting shells and hugging everyone she met, spreading the same kind of joy that had touched a lonely man's heart on a flight that changed everything. And somewhere in the city, James would wake up in a house that no longer felt empty, planning another family dinner and thinking about how lucky he was to have been on Flight 447 that day. Sometimes the best things in life come disguised as emergencies, and sometimes the family you're meant to have finds you at 35,000 feet in the most unexpected way possible.